Okay.
All right. Fantastic. I have an
Good to
answer
see you.
for you.
Oh, okay.
I'm looking at your email, and I have an answer for your last question first, which is what's the role, meaning, potential purpose for the activity of role playing in today's world, today, the world we live in?
Yeah.
And I want to point out that I'm talking only about what we've been talking about. So lots of things are called role playing, and I don't care. I don't care about
Sure.
500-person LARPs, and I don't care about all these other things.
Yeah.
So it is the only means we have today of conducting folk fiction.
Ooh, okay.
There's no commerce involved in making the fiction. Nobody's paying us to do it. Nobody's paying to observe the product of it. There is no industry for the fiction to be produced. There is no
Mm-hmm.
medium that for it to be produced in which is subject to ownership and to commerce.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing else like that. In fact, we are so used to those contexts for fiction that
Yes.
every other analysis and understanding of fiction is completely embedded in its commercial identity. You can't have a literature course without people talking in terms of whether something is sells or not. You can't have a
Mm-hmm.
cinema course except in the context of who has been and not been a successful director or actor. Careerism completely defines and shapes our understanding of all other ways of making fiction,
Mm-hmm.
to the extent that completely inaccurately, the only way people, or one way people try to describe what we do, they have to turn to analogies with children's play. And there's no
Yes.
reason, there is no resemblance between what we do at the tabletop and children's games like Let's Pretend and things like that. They say the
Mm-hmm.
only resemblance is that what they are doing is for their own enjoyment and without the context of commerce.
Mm-hmm.
But that's enough for people to say, well, what we're doing is like what they're doing, even though the activity itself has no resemblance.
Mm-hmm.
So we have, for adults, folk production of fiction. This is the only way we know. It's the only way we do it.
Mm-hmm.
There is no other way that I can think of. And
Interesting.
so that's really an observation. The question is, what is any kind of purpose or meaning to that? And I don't know about purposes and meanings because I am the wrong kind of person for that. I am not a metaphysician. I am not, the word political progressive doesn't apply to me because I don't think that there is a constant improvement of the human condition that we can contribute to. I
Mm-hmm.
just would prefer for it not to suck
Yes.
personally. If anybody's listening, but the and I'm also not I'm not really, I don't have a purpose at that level. What I do have is a sense of purpose personally, which is that I like to see this kind of fiction made and I like to do it. And that I think it has value because the emergent that the positive properties of enjoying fiction together, just like of all the other leisure art forms, whether it's music or anything else, there are
Mm-hmm.
positive outcomes. In the case of fiction, it is that we can reach each other better than we did before. And we
Mm-hmm.
can illuminate things for one another. And also, what I like to say, especially about my game Spiona and Shahida, that if you ask people about, for example, Israel and Palestine, if you ask people about communism and the Cold War,
Mm-hmm.
you will get boilerplate in English. standard phrases, the standard, the culturally acceptable phrasings. Or if they are not culturally acceptable, at least they are shaped into a particular kind of dissenting voice, an acceptable form of dissent that somebody else has approved of and somebody else has stated originally. You will get standard lines. I'm going to be a little personal in my explanation of this. So, what I'm trying to say is that there you are in a country where if I talk to anybody about the content of Spione and we have a conversation just like this, I know what I'm going to hear. I can quote everything. I will use these terms on purpose, not very nicely,
Mhm.
but I can tell you every line every Vessi will give me, and I can tell you every line every Ossi will give me.
Mhm.
Just all the lines, right? All the phrases, all the they did this and they did that, and when we did this for them, what did they do, and all these things, right? Um, I can hear all about, the fall of socialism, the collapse of the Iron Curtain. I can hear all about that. But when we play Spione, that's when you find out what the humanity of the situation is.
Mhm.
Not just in the fiction that I present in the book, but the humanity that we have at the table.
Yeah.
We played Spione together
Wow.
right near the old Checkpoint Charlie. And so only in that, I mean, they liked each other. They were nice to each other and everything. There was no, problem really. But the two cultures were almost completely as different as you could see.
Yes.
And we were able to play a really, really fun game of Spione and to enrich ourselves together about exactly the real history that defined both of their lives completely.
Mhm.
And so that's what fiction can do. That's what it is capable of doing. We will arrive at communications about really important things, in this case, historical, not necessarily as historical, right? Not necessarily as political or as, uh, but we are able to connect
Mhm.
in a meaningful way. And I think in a much more honest way than with our typical phrases, our typical ways of saying things, the things that you are used to hearing,
Mhm.
right? So that's my argument for what we are doing here, and I don't think it's a little thing. I think it's a pretty big thing,
Okay. So,
especially because it is clearly wherever it goes, people start to do it.
yep.
Wherever it goes, nationally speaking, people grab it and pick it up. The whether I mean the Dungeons and Dragons had been in Germany for less than a year, I think, before somebody starts writing Das Schwarze Auge.
Yeah.
You know, maybe that's not the best example, but on the other hand, Dirk tells me that he and his friends had maybe half of a Dungeons and Dragons book when they were
Okay.
kids. And what did they do? They filled in the rest with their own minds and played
Yeah.
Dungeons and Dragons. And so then the same thing, you can hear the same thing everywhere. Wherever the activity goes, people start to do it.
Mhm.
And I think it's because we are all good at it. We actually are all good at doing this at some very basic level.
Natural
And
storytellers, sir.
I think so. And
Mhm.
but you need procedure. I mean, just like you said, well, we are natural competitors for fun too, right? We like to play competitive games. That doesn't
Mhm.
mean you don't need card games with rules. I'm not talking about an institutionalized form of the activity, which clearly becomes a function of the institution, then it becomes the activity. Just like one could say the same thing about a lot of movies these days. They're much more about the institutions of celebrity and of certain aspects of cultural messaging than there
Mm-hmm.
are about actually anything to do with a movie. So the thing is, here we have something which is, for lack of a better word, it is too cheap and too easy to be grabbed. You can't sell it. You can't sell the product, right? You can, and so I think that I mean, it's a little bit like air. You can't put taxes on the air or sell the air, because I'll just breathe this air over here instead of the one you sold me in the little bottles. Um, so I really think that there's a lot of potential for reaching one another with these things than with any other way of storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I was thinking about these things as yeah. This week I do like a week of story games with teenagers. So we play like on 3 days this week story games, and so it's so I think last year we played it, and it's a certain way of reaching people, and
mhm.
at the same time also I'm thinking of for myself. Okay, I'm putting so much time in this. There, I have a sense it has also some deeper value, or it's like I don't know, like understanding humanity a bit more, um, or developing certain personal skills, or in a psychological way. So let's think about that.
I tend to think that that's all true. Now, before, the trouble is that such analysis can instantly become overly academic.
Yeah, sure.
People are starting to study this in school. People that I knew when they were 20 are now professors getting tenure, specializing in gaming and role playing.
Okay. Well.
So, but you know, maybe after 25 years in academia, I'm a little bit cynical, and
Okay.
I say, just like I get real tired of academic film analysis when it's clear that they're not watching the movies. Just like I get tired in my field of evolutionary biology. I got tired of people doing all kinds of things and getting great big grants when it was very clear they had not read or understood the history of experiments they were working with.
Okay.
Um, and so I don't know if any of that is good. It's because somebody with goodwill is doing it, not because the speaking of institutionalization, I don't think that the institutions of careerism in academia, I don't think they're serving us very well. So my hope is that we can we can develop as enjoyable and functional versions of these things as we can. I can't pretend to say that I'm doing this for the greater good. I do it maybe from more of an artist's point of view, which is that it will drive me crazy if I don't write it down.
Yeah.
I'm just, I like to say I have a personality problem. I have to design the games. And so, I mean, why can't I just pick up there are plenty of role playing games I like. Why don't I
Yeah.
just play them? Why don't I just play them? No, I have, a problem. So, and so that's really my experience of what I've done. So I have to, so I do think there's great, great, great value here. If there weren't, I probably would be doing it anyway, because that just seems to be what I have to do.
Okay.
So let's take a look at direction story playing in this
Yes.
context, because what you're working with here is the openness of saying, what do we really want to tell a story about? That's very risky. In many ways, it says, oh, we'll make it easier. We won't give it a setting. We won't give it we won't lock you down. You can have this kind of character. Your character has to be an elf. It has to be an orc, or it has to be a hobbit. I mean, or you can be this kind of
Mm-hmm.
human who is obviously a stereotypical English person, and this other human who is a stereotypical something out of a movie about a barbarian. We're going to
Mm-hmm.
do that. You can be one of those. And you're saying, oh, no, no, direction story play isn't like that. We aren't making you be one of these character types. We're free. Well,
Yes.
the problem with that freedom is that it is not inspiring.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So
It's
we
the
have to.
basis.
Exactly.
There's another layer missing there.
And
That's
the
the it's like it's the engine of the car, but it's not the Lamborghini that makes
mhm.
your really or the
Now, of course,
Ferrari.
the trouble with saying to somebody, look at my great Lamborghini. Well, we all know that number one, you don't want them to scratch it or do anything with it that you wouldn't do.
Okay.
So you put them in the car and you say, okay, you can drive on this little track on my little estate and you can't do anything else. Oh, and by the way, I made sure that the wheels go by itself and that that it goes at the speeds that I have preset and it's all set. You drive my Lamborghini. I've made sure that you're going to drive it just right.
Uh-huh.
And I just described how many role playing games?
A
I just
lot. Yeah.
described a lot of them,
Yeah.
right? So this analogy is beginning to get a little bit ridiculous, but it's kind of fun. Um, the the idea though is that you cannot give somebody a disassembled car engine and say, okay, there you go. So so how is it that when you played with people, and I think that the kids that you talked about, the younger people anyway, that you talked about, are probably a really good model for making this functional. How did you start?
With that group, I will not play directions for two reasons.
Hmm.
It's the group is too big. It's gonna be like we will be 14 people,
Ah,
so that's gonna be too hard to manage. And I also want to get the setting of tabletop, so it's gonna be a bit more. What is it called? Chamber? I don't know the terms. It's like it's going to be more freeform chamber larp or whatever you call it. So it's
hmm.
going to be more in that direction, and it's very very focused, contained. So very specific setting that starts directly with a certain scenario and has a very concise structure. A bit different than direction. I mean, directions basically can go theoretically. You can make also just like a tabletop RPG campaign go on for a year, 2 years if you want, like from the concept. So
I see the difference,
yeah,
but I think the variable that I'm interested in isn't that different.
okay,
That something makes what you told them about the fiction to start interesting.
uh-huh.
Something. So what's the something?
Okay. What makes it interesting? I think it's a mix of I think between enjoyable escapism, but also like authentic realism. So
Hmm.
it's so
That's
you
not what
have
I mean. I don't mean its qualities. I mean, what was it fictionally? In other words, a
what we
person,
played. For.
well, a person, when they get interested in the beginning of doing this thing,
Yes.
it's not because of the systemic qualities necessarily, because they have not really experienced them yet.
Yeah.
It's about what they are imagining.
Yeah, I think what gets them hooked is that I really, I mean, you saw the how we approach the setting. So
Hmm.
it's like, okay, what's inspiration, like setting elements, what type of people, ingredients you like, you don't like. This also like, okay, is it like a high tempo, low tempo? Is it
Hmm.
dark?
Hmm.
Things to really get the people, like get them to think, hey, I'm really playing what I want to play, because I think that's really special. Also, that like. That you have your favorite TV series or you had a clear vision, you have something in mind, and then when you get feel people get the sense, hey, wow, I could really play this this thing I have in my mind or that we have in mind, we could really just jump right into that and play that. That gets people hooked. My experience.
Now, how much of that do you think? I'm trying to think about ways in which this could be a quicker start. And to some extent, things like you've made, like with the thieves and stuff like that, you have
One
kind of a
shot.
package. Now,
Yeah.
I'm really interested in those packages.
Yes.
It would be really interesting. You know what? This is going to sound ridiculous, and it's not really a very serious suggestion, but it's an interesting idea.
Okay.
An almost random assortment of those variables.
Mm-hmm.
The pace, the I mean, somebody could say police drama,
Mm-hmm.
and yet all those other variables could be different, and they would be two very different police dramas.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess what I'm saying is the game has a system which has a lot of power. Why not let everybody into the system quicker without really setting up as much as you do?
So sort of like Fiasco playsets, that type of thing, or
Yeah, something a little bit more quick and jump in, but there's a lot of room to develop how you want to do it.
mm-hmm.
I
Okay.
mean, it like Fiasco playsets, yes, although nothing like Fiasco.
Mm-hmm.
Because
No,
Fiasco
just from
itself,
that
yeah,
approach.
yeah,
Yeah.
because Fiasco by itself is the same thing every time, every time, every time.
Yes.
That game makes one sausage.
But it makes a good sausage.
I don't like it that much, but it is a sausage.
Okay.
I completely agree that the sausage is effective. Um, but it doesn't matter what you stick in it. It makes one sausage. So I'm saying that's not what I mean, but I do mean the way that jumping into a game of Fiasco is always interesting. The part where you jump in,
Yeah.
right then, that's always interesting.
Yeah, always like you build these relations, you have some relationships, couple items, and then you suddenly have you're all in this all of a sudden you're in the middle of a interesting story.
And that
So
interesting story issue is really, if you watch people doing it, it's brought more by them than it is by the playset, but the playset got them going.
yes, yeah.
And that's really what I'm talking about.
Mhm. So
So,
it's
yeah.
basically to have a okay, so to have like a pre-packaged stuff that is still
Yes.
something open to find
Still
that
pretty open.
balance.
Still
Yeah.
pretty open and enough so that the inspiration and I would think that given the starting inspiration, filling in the rest to the people doing it would seem obvious. Of
Hmm.
course, of course the rest of it is going to be like this. Why didn't he fill in the rest of it? It's so obvious.
Yeah.
And of course, if you give it to another table, they will say the same thing but come up with completely different,
Yes. Yeah.
you know. So I'm trying to help a little bit with your thinking about what to do with this thing. I think packaging those is much better than presenting something that says you can do anything.
Yes. Yeah. I understand.
Yeah. Otherwise, Jason would have taken Fiasco and presented it as generic and said, "Oh, do whatever you want with it," and nobody would have done anything.
That's actually right. If you just had like these empty
Hmm.
play sheets where you can have the dice and the empty fields, and now you fill whatever you like,
Right.
it would not take off. Yeah, that's right.
Exactly. And yet, for some reason, everybody seems to keep thinking that if I can just do that and it will be such a good system, everybody will realize this and it will be a selling point that you can do anything. It's not a selling point that you can do anything.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And
I'm thinking also. I don't know if you know the mini game by John Harper, like Lasers and Feelings. It's just a
hmm
one page,
hmm
and it has a couple tables where you roll basically
hmm
what happens, and it's just like you roll a couple dice, and suddenly you have a scenario.
hmm
I kind of like that. Or from Jace Morningstar's Durance, where you have this
hmm
planet and you roll also again some things and choose some things.
Durance is a particularly sophisticated example because
Yeah,
of
it's very,
all those
very.
incredible options and the brilliant
Yeah.
writing. I think it's one of his best works. I really like Durance. It scares me a little bit, and
Okay.
I still haven't played it much, and I still don't know. I asked Jason the last time I saw him. I was like, "That's so system light. does it really, you have very specific systemic features and nothing else. Does it really
Mm,
work? And he said, yeah, he says, I think I found the barest minimum where system matters. You can't
okay.
play it without it. With it, it's wonderful. Without it, it's just talking. But with it, you have no choice. You're going to play something now.
Hmm.
So I still want to try it. But that's a good example,
Yeah.
if you want, but I'm really saying that it's a very complex example for what we're talking about.
Yes.
But something like that, in the sense that it is now when we get moving, then we see how effective your systemic features are.
Yes.
You and I have only played a little bit, but it seemed to me that using the random table was a little more fun than just rolling the d6 and picking a number off saying this number is dangerous, this number is not. I'm sure that.
Well, in this situation, yeah.
Mhm,
I mean, like when you have a fight, I think
mhm.
it's easier if you have a fight to just roll dice, because then you
Right,
have to come up. Okay,
right.
I hit your ear.
Yeah, you're right.
I
You're right. Yeah,
damage
there's
your liver. Or
such a thing as too much then, and everybody will start world building right there into the table, right? Who needs that? So that's true. But the point being that we have some really nice ways of
yes,
things changing and moving along.
yes, yeah.
So,
It's all,
and particularly if we avoid what I've talked about as workshopping, where everybody sits around talking about what they're about to do or the way it could go, you know, it could go this way, it could go this way. No, wait, I think it could go this way. That can get really tedious really fast.
that's actually the thing. I mean, on the other hand, I like it. You know how we did it. It's also I like also. I understand you don't want to talk things to death before
Hmm.
anything happening in the story.
Hmm.
On the other hand, it's also good to have it's more of an atmosphere like where people are encouraged to say, hey, what about we go this way, like we two did, and then we say, hey, okay, let's go a bit more in the direction to
Hmm.
with that, like also openness and generosity with each other, say pick up ideas. I
I
mean,
completely
I don't know.
agree. So I want you to think about what you do at the table so that those
Yeah,
moments are as productive as possible
yeah.
and they don't talk it to death. Because I
But can
bet
I
you do something at
formalize?
the table.
Yeah, but is it something to formalize, or how do you establish that mood? I mean, I can say this is the gaming principles. You have to play like that, or
Sure.
I
No,
can
that's
say,
not
hey
quite what I
guys,
mean. Let's just talk about what it is first before we think of it. There's
okay,
two things, right? Phenomenon and pedagogy. They're
okay,
different
yes, yeah,
things. So let's think about the phenomenon first and then see if there's a pedagogy or not. There might not
yeah.
be. Um,
So the
so,
phenomenon is basically inspired also a lot by like children's play, basically, like
mhm,
looking how children play. In fact, my like epiphany was the first time I came up with this style of playing was playing with a child,
mhm, mhm.
and it was like it's this really fluid openness to hey, let's go this way, okay, let's do that, and it's jumping into things with enthusiasm and not having this, okay, well, my character wants to do this, but wait, according to this rule you have to do this now, not to get into that, but really have
Mhm.
this like this, yeah, like this fluid enthusiasm that can really go
I
around.
agree. And so the idea here is if one person has a lot of that, but has, but if for whatever reason everybody thinks that that person is in charge, then they go dead. So how is it that that becomes communicated and back and forth?
Huh?
And it usually means that if you have people putting in input, that the situation cannot work unless this person has input this way and that person has input that way. They have ways of contributing so that together they make a situation or the potential outcomes of a role, or they
Yeah.
make a narration or whatever it is, but they are coming in different directions for that to happen. Um, so I know that must happen when you play this.
Yeah. So I mean, but what I don't want is something like rulified. I don't want like tokens like in Universalis or to have.
I agree.
You know,
I agree.
I don't want that.
Mhm.
And it's maybe what we discussed last time. Okay, can you make an example? Because it's like, you know, the analogy I gave with jazz. Like it's not a cooking recipe. It's a
You can't
something.
say you can't say, how do I play this jazz solo?
Yeah, sort of like that. Yeah.
So
You can
I
increase
agree.
the likelihoods, like, and
agree.
you example,
Mhm.
and a lot of games rely actually to that just one player who is the GM gets
Yes.
a certain talent, let's say jazz talent, and the rest uh, uh, go along. But this works best when you have really. It's jazz is actually good. It's not everybody has to be Miles Davis, but if everybody gets
again,
into moods.
And again, my experience is that people are better at it than they think.
Yeah,
And
they
so,
are.
and that's something to bear in mind. We don't have to train people to the basic level of competence here. The question is
The
to
only
find the competence that we know is there.
yeah,
How is
the
it?
only way I have to train the people who traditional art. I have to train
No, they're the worst.
traditional art.
Yeah, never mind. Never mind
They're
that. They are.
horrible.
I completely agree. I
Yeah.
completely agree. I mean, we are in complete agreement about that. And I was even thinking of saying something. And I said, well, let's not talk about that. That's depressing. But you're right, because, and I completely agree. There have been some strange cultural and subcultural canalizations of thought and behavior that is very
Yeah.
non-productive. So,
Yes.
I've even used some terms about that in the past that got me in a lot of trouble, but I still think they are correct. So the thing that I want to say about this training thing, it's not because it's not training after all. It's releasing.
Mm-hmm.
It is releasing what we can do. And so, what
Okay.
are the circumstances of your behavior? What are the circumstances of play and of the routines that help to release it?
Okay.
And that's a better way to look at it, because then we get away from rulifying it, right? We're not,
Yeah.
directing, do this, do that. We are saying, what do we do so that this is maximally released?
Mhm. Yeah. One example is, for example, like the game Microscope, for example, suggests that the first player, being the facilitator, it starts with something very bold
Yes.
to show people that's like what the system is capable of. Like, okay, oh, you know,
Yeah.
I'm gonna destroy it now, but don't worry. If it's shocking you, you can always go back.
Right.
But like, just to make a bold move to show people what is really possible. For
I
example.
think that's a good idea. I also think a similar idea is to begin with something that's a little challenging. Like, remember my picture, my verbal description of uh, the low tech but very sophisticated woman looking at this,
Yes.
this pistol. It's provocative, and say, put
Okay.
this out here. I bet that you are all thinking about something now. Let's make that happen. That way you have a the brain is very powerful. It will start working on it even though the person doesn't really know what to say. The
Yes.
brain is working on it already. And the other nice thing about this activity is that you have at its best, you have the ability to say something, and then others are able to jump
Yes.
in a most productive way, in a
Yeah. For
way
example,
that makes what you said better.
yeah. For example, when we create a random table on the fly, I think that's a good example because there you show people have permission to bring in their ideas. Like, okay, what could happen? Okay, let's roll 1 to 6, 6 ideas or 3 ideas. And then it has people are allowed, they have permission to bring in their ideas. And these ideas, if you roll that number, it has really a tremendous consequence.
Mm-hmm.
So for the whole story. So that's you give people permission, and it has something empowerment. There's empowerment behind it in terms of the consequence for the story together.
So how is this made? Uh, you know, part of it again to stick with the phenomenon. Something about the way that you are talking to people at the table when you play
Yes.
makes this easier rather than harder.
Hmm.
And something about the way the game works makes it easier rather than harder.
Yes. Yeah.
And it seems to me as though, although you might not necessarily want to turn that into directive step by step rules, you can let that you can let that direct how you write the rules that are there, the way you phrase them, the way that you state the rules in the
Mm.
text is should be the way that you do it in play.
Okay. So you mean like a ritualistic text, like for example, Archipelago or Ten Candles? They have like a ritualistic formula. Like for example, if you're allowed to say if you don't like what somebody says, you can say try it another way, and this empowers you to like sort of criticize somebody without feeling bad and
Does that
say, hey,
happen?
it's
Does that happen
hmm?
in directions?
Oh
Because I
yes,
don't.
yeah.
Oh yeah, tell me more.
Oh, no, no, no. I don't have that. I don't have any ritualistic phrases. I
I
don't have
know,
that.
but I mean, does it happen that people have trouble with what another person says? Because I'm not sure they do. Looking at your game,
No.
hmm
Uh,
that's not a
I just
problem.
have one basic. Yeah, I have one basic like escalation method. It's called to say question, and then you can basically say question, and you can either have a raise a question in the story, say, hey, should we go this way or that way, or question could be also something organizational or just some like, wait, question, where is the scene taking place or something like
That's
that. But
right,
it's
right.
going
It
on
seems,
meta level.
yeah, it's. I agree, but it's not very. It's not about disagreement so much as clarification.
Yes.
Possibly a little disagreement. You're like, wait a minute, why are you suddenly putting in, snakes with breasts? Question why? I get that, but I don't think that happens in your games very much, and so I don't see it as a problem that needs to be solved.
Okay.
I'm
Interesting. Yeah.
thinking I'm thinking more in terms of inspiration uh, rather than negotiation.
Oh, okay. Hmm.
Right. So if you have a sense of excitement about this provocative or interesting thing, then you can go ahead with it very easily. Tell me, and this is one reason why I keep being a little bit quiet about the thieves scenario that you have been working on so hard.
I'm
Um,
open.
yeah, but
Yeah.
but but uh,
Some,
but but the reason I've been a little quiet about it is that there's nothing challenging. No, there's nothing inspiring in it. It tells me what I can act out, just like these movies that I already know.
yes, that's right.
It doesn't make me say something like, "Aha, I can do it this way." Or I don't. What's the word I want? I don't say, "Oh, that's interesting. I don't know where that would go." You know,
So you've
what
seen it all before somehow.
Well, what I'm trying to say is that I think that something can be presented where I don't feel that way, where
Hmm.
I say I don't know where this would go, especially with all these people here. Different people are going to have different takes on how this is going to go.
But actually, it does. I mean, that's why I find this scenario interesting because it's really like the super cliche. It's like you have it in. You could have it like as medieval Robin Hood type of thing. You could have it like in Mission Impossible or modern thing. But it's a class. It's a very classic cliche, a very cliche setting with cliche characters, like super cliche characters. But still, it's when you play it, you end up with surprising things, and that's actually my
Tell me
intention
more.
also to.
Right. Tell me more about that.
Okay, so it's basically when we played for example with one group, it's just there was one guy was captured, and then we used we created this relation character plots where they have secrets things,
Hmm.
and then suddenly other character revealed that they had actually they were pregnant from this guy who was in a relationship with another person, and suddenly it shifted the whole dynamic in the group and created tension, and then so it was like a surprising twist. We did that in the game mechanic. Basically, the only thing that happened mechanically was that this guy was captured because he rolled a bad die, and because of the dice. But then what happened? They all escaped except this one who was captured, and then the one player revealed that the character is pregnant. And then suddenly it shifts a lot of things. Happen based on that.
With that in mind, and if you are confident that the potential to do this is very strong in your presentations, that can be that is the selling point.
Okay.
Anybody can just play through the same old genre and the same old, Hollywood script.
Yes.
For this year's blockbuster. The question is here, you actually get to take these exciting things and actually make it, for lack of a better word, completely yours. You don't, to say you get to be in it is not good enough. Here, you get to make of it what the people making movies are too scared to do. You get to do with it whatever you want together.
Yes.
And furthermore, another big selling point, and you see, this is the interesting thing. I think there's more to it than just saying there's no GM. Let's be a little more specific. There is no, I think I mentioned this to you before, there's no safety net.
Yes.
You are on your own. This is where you get to make a story or not and have a great time. It will work. It can do it. You can do it. It can do it. You can do it, and you can do it with this very well. That's very different from the guarantee that we have the Firefly role-playing game license. So therefore, if you follow our rules and pick our character types, it'll be like you're in Firefly.
Yes, that's exactly the Margaret Weis games.
Right, exactly. But what's the problem with those? We're done. Everything I just said, that's the only thing it does. And I mean the only thing it does.
Yes, it's an emulation of a certain, certain exact type of game, or even certain genre, or even specific movie. Yeah.
Right,
it's
but it's an emulation of it all the way through. Not just an emulation of it as a jumping off point, but an emulation of it all the way through. And so there's no, in fact, it's selling that there's no surprise. Well, don't worry, we won't go off script. We won't do anything different. Your player cannot ruin it by doing something different.
Well, yeah.
And so
depends how open it is or closed. Yes,
all of the ones I'm talking about are completely closed. I mean, that's, and if you really look at their rules, all they are is for falling off cliffs and drowning and shooting people and stuff anyway, So it's not, and then they put in a lot of phrases from the movies and the shows, put the phrases in to the chapters, and everybody feels like they're there. But there's not much there in terms of a game. There's not much there in terms of an activity. And even in the activity, there's nothing there which made the show good.
Okay.
It's almost as though all the clothes, it's wearing the show's clothes, but it's not good like the show was. And so that's what I'm trying to say. This is the other way around. This is the other way around. This is where you actually get to go with these inspirations wherever it is this group goes with them.
Yes, yeah.
This is
not,
right.
Yes, there's no railroad, there is no sandbox, and like it can be first a bit scary when you first see, oh my god, there is no what do you have on the planks? There are no planks.
Right. Even with people who say that they like to play in sandbox and not be told what to do, they still want to walk up to the dungeon and go into the dungeon that's prepared, And so you're right. I mean, it's completely against the habits of the hobby. and a lot of people still want to do it anyway.
Mm.
So when I wrote Sorcerer, I only thought it would be interesting to very few people who wanted to do it.
Hmm.
Very few. I didn't expect to sell more than 500 copies ever.
Okay.
What I didn't anticipate was that there would be a very large market for the game, its largest market, of people who didn't believe it was possible, but were unable to stop themselves from wanting to try. So the typical Sorcerer customer is in a stressed state of mind
Okay.
because they can't believe it. They can't believe it. The role playing doesn't work this way. You
Hmm.
can't play like this. It won't work. How does it work? Tell me. you know. So they're in this state of it can't work, but I must know.
Hmm.
And so
Interesting.
that's what I guess you are finding with this is that when you have to find a way to excite people about having that kind of power, but they're used to thinking of that power as control.
Yes, that's the
And
problem
so,
with
right,
traditional RPG players.
absolutely correct. They think that any agency in the game is the same thing as controlling what everybody else is doing.
Yeah.
It's completely
You know,
toxic. There's nothing good about it. It's not a style of playing, it's a
yeah,
dysfunction. It
yeah.
just
You
is.
know, with traditional RPG players, it's like with teenagers where you tell them you're not allowed to drink alcohol, and
Yeah,
then you put them like a case of beer in front of them, they just go crazy.
that's right.
And it's a bit
Right,
like that. And with other people, I don't have that problem. They just say, "Oh, okay, that's how it works." I just
right,
explain to them, and
right,
they just use it in a responsible, adult, mature way.
right,
But with tabletop RPG, I think it's the power where this, wow, I can do this, or they either have do things that are crazy, or they hold on to their
right,
things like, but
right.
that's my position, that's
That's
my
right.
character,
Right,
and
right, right.
it's
Stay away. Yeah,
limited.
and
Yeah,
get upset if anything happens to them. So yes,
yeah.
I completely agree. So the question now is how do you have mechanisms and inspirations that bring two groups of people together? One group of people is the easy one. Easy to play but hard to find. These are the people who would like to do this, have not done any tabletop role playing, or maybe just a little bit every so often, and they are ready to go. All they need is your procedures. They are ready to go. But they
Hmm.
are hard to find because they do not exist in any kind of hobby culture as a group. They are not a
Yes.
target market, right? They are not a sector that you can identify and then advertise to or anything like that.
Yeah.
The other group are people who do identify as tabletop role players, who know that they are not very happy with these other mechanisms that we are talking about. They know it.
Yes.
And they want to try something else. They may have some bad habits, but at least they are trying to struggle against them in some way. They're
Hmm.
willing to try. Getting those two people together is your goal. To say
Hmm.
things that make sense to either of them.
Yes.
And I think that more than anything, I mean, right now, the way your text is written, you explain it perfectly to yourself. There's nothing unclear about your text either. Your text it's completely clear.
Hmm.
Clarity is not the problem. Inspiration is.
Yes.
That's where I think we are aiming now when we start. You said you wanted to talk a little bit more about how to market it, how to position it, how to make
Yes.
it available. And that's the first thing, is to say, who are we writing to? Who
Yeah.
is this to be directed to? And I think by identifying them, both of them are willing to jump in and try the techniques.
Hmm.
Both of them need something that intrigues them.
Yes.
And then both of them have to be convinced, the tabletop players more than the others, that there is no safety net, but it is not just chaos either.
Yeah.
They won't believe you, of course. You just have to.
Mhm.
They just have to try it eventually.
I think people get inspired also a lot through settings, basically, that you have something that says, wow, this is, I need to play this.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's my experience. Like when people are getting interested in Kickstarter, unfortunately, its setting is all in your face and
Yeah.
nobody talks about the mechanics.
I completely agree, but let me suggest that setting, as you are talking about it, is actually not quite the right variable. This is good news. The right variable is a situation.
Situation. Uh-huh.
Now, situation necessarily means there's a setting behind it. But the setting doesn't have to be any more detailed than it is to make the situation possible.
Mm-hmm.
And the same thing goes for characters. You can't have a situation unless there are characters in the situation, but they don't have to be anything more than is necessary for that situation to happen. So if you look at it, you're convinced that there is a great big setting, and you're convinced that there are these really interesting characters, but really all you need to work with is the extent to which those are operating as a situation.
So what's the situation? Is that what I call plots? Like, is that or
what
scenes and
you're
plots?
calling plots, yes, particularly before they move. Shall we say the potential for plots? Like it's like physics,
Mhm,
right?
okay.
Right? Potential energy is up here, and
Yes.
then you let go of it and it falls. That's kinetic energy. I'm talking
Yes.
about the potential energy, which is pretty much the way you are using the word plot when you talk about
Yeah.
preparing. That's so.
I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the biggest also practical terms, like compared to traditional RPG, the difference. Usually what it's traditional RPG is character centric. You have your character sheet in front of you. That's where you focus your energy. And here
yet,
it makes a difference. Just having this current plot sheet on the
right.
table as the center of focus
Yes.
makes a difference in the dynamic.
I completely agree. And when it comes to Sorcerer, well, I'll pop this up here, and I don't expect you to see all the things, but on one side is the regular character sheet, and the other side is the back of the character sheet. And all I want you to see is that the back has this big graphic on it, right? This X.
Where is the X?
This great big X right here.
The lore price.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's the character sheet, even though it's on the back. And after people have played the game a lot, they tell me, your sheet is terrible, Ron. And I say, what's wrong with my sheet? And they say, that thing needs to be on the front. And all those numbers that are on the front just need to be small references along the bottom or something. Because we need that. We need it in front of us. We need to see how things move on it and how they are related. That diagram is actually a very, very powerful instrument in play. I even have a video up about it in my Sorcerer game right now. And so, but the point is that I was dumb enough to put it in 1999, okay, cut me a little bit of credit. In 1999, I didn't know anything better than to put it on the back.
Yeah.
And so now there are plenty of sheets available online that people have made up that stick it on the front, and I say, okay, that's a really good idea. Let's do that. So that's exactly the kind. And it's a situational sheet. It's a situational diagram. So yes, that's what I'm talking about. I am talking about this thing, and yet there are factors of the situation that are compelling, that aren't just a person and their problems. It would put anybody in that situation. It would give them a problem. What is it about the situation more generally, politically, historically, geographically, science fiction, or whatever it is, that means whoever is in that situation will have some kind of problem?
So, like, is it like Front, like powered by the Apocalypse Fronts? Is it like
a little bit? Yeah, a little bit like that. Another is to think more into a really good example would be in Shock, where you begin with some
The
aspect of
social
the
psyche game, or
right, yeah, where the
okay.
idea is that you have some notion of a futuristic setting, but what's most important is the shock to today's values. You see, you look at today, right now, the real world, and you say, let us deliver a shock through some kind of science fiction element.
Okay, that's a good example. Yeah.
And you shock it, now we will turn that shock into some kind of science fiction setting and trappings.
Mm,
And so that therefore in this situation, if you say, okay, now let's make up characters, everybody, give some very basic characters, and then they say, oh, okay, that one's going to be the protagonist for this story. Because any of them could be, because the system has been shocked.
mhm. So that's the core, the original seed of the whole
For
story. It's not the characters and things,
well,
but
for
that's
shock it
the.
is. For shock it is. For
Mm,
sorcerer, it's the other way around. It's the decision of that particular player character that is going to
yes.
deliver the shock to everything else. And you
Hmm.
still have something in sorcerer called the kicker that you have to write, which is something just happened that's going to change your life. What is it?
Hmm.
And then the GM has to use the kicker.
I need more paper.
That's a good sign. So
Yeah.
so that's what I'm thinking. Maybe I should leave you with just thinking about the kicker for characters and the shock for setting and say, okay, those makes either of those makes situation. Sometimes
Hmm.
it's highly intrinsic to the nature of the character themselves. Everything would be fine except for this guy is the way he is. Other times it's the other way around, where you have an everyman. These are everyman. These could be anybody in the setting. But with
Hmm.
this going on, that's not the case anymore. They're not
Yeah.
just anybody now. So it could go either way. I don't care which one. But the idea is when you have that stated in concrete terms, an actual fictional description of it, you are ready to go. You are ready to go
Mm,
with very little preparation from that point
yeah.
forward.
And then people are also on board. I understand that. So
And they
when you
start
have
putting
that
in
driving
everything and it
force,
always fits.
yeah, and then you don't have to push people to do things because they're already excited. Oh my god! Let's say so. You need a setting where things are like sort of an equilibrium status quo, and then you
Right.
twist it, or you put it, bring it
Right.
out of balance.
Well, you could, or you could have a situation where there's nothing strange about the setting, at least especially in terms of the people in it,
Yes.
and then you shock it through or kick it through this particular person's situation,
Hmm.
right? But either way, but what I'm trying to say is that as procedure, like a fiasco playset, it does all that for you in the first place,
Yes.
right? That's you're here you go. Here
Hmm.
you go. And so, and fiasco playsets are actually probably one of the best examples of a bite-sized, you know,
Yeah.
on a little plate. Here you go, usable, bite-sized, 2 seconds to explain. There it is.
There
And
you go. Yes.
whether you want to go that far or whether you want to have a procedure more like in shock, where you literally create the shocks through everybody talking, and you have a little sheet where they
Mm,
become codified. At least in one version of the game, I really liked this. Everybody came up with a shock, so you had all these columns, and so each one was labeled with a shock, but
mm.
only one of them was going to be the real shock. The other
Oh.
ones just became details that make it more like science fiction.
Okay.
The others just become small weirdness.
Hmm.
And so it was really nice. That way you ended up with a very, very 1970s, social science fiction,
Yes.
situation, but also very, very colorful. You had all
Hmm.
these other things that added details. A good example that we had in one of our games was that the shock that we chose was the genericizing of gender. Gender was completely
Yeah.
out of cultural view, out
Hmm.
of psychological view, just out of view.
Yes.
It was literally just gone. and we had like a technology, that just rendered it gone. I
Mm.
mean, at least out of the brain, out of the perceptions. So then another person had a shock that they had described had to do with the removal of verbal communication, of written verbal communication, that everything was just a label, a symbol, or a color, or
Mm.
a code. There was no literally written way to describe anything.
Mm.
And so it was all just categories. And so that did not become a shock. But in our story, whenever anyone opened a file or whatever, nothing was written. They just had colored tabs that if and that's what communicated what they needed to know. But it was
Mm.
just a detail. It was part of what made the whole thing weird. So that way, so shock is a really good example of how to come up with a really rich and often disturbing setting
Mm.
full of drama
Yeah.
without much work.
Yeah. I mean,
So yeah,
this is obviously like world changing on a world changing level. I wonder how it would be. Let's say you have a setting like a Victorian setting or something, or like a normal urban white picket fence setting or so.
yes,
It could. It doesn't have to be aliens or
exactly, exactly,
transmutation
not
or
at all,
something.
not at
It
all.
can be also something that somebody's elected from another village is elected the mayor or somebody, or if that's big enough, I wonder if.
You would be surprised at how little it takes. I think there has to be some kind of charge to the values have to be threatened, right?
Yes,
There
values have
has
to
to
be
be
fair.
values threatened. I mean, you could say, there's uh, in the case of Spiona, the people who are doing the spying are threatening the well-being of people who are close to them. They may not want to do that. They may love those
Yeah.
people very much, but they are threatening those people's well-being.
Mm.
So the fact that they are doing this thing, which ultimately means deceiving deceiving people and exploiting their trust or
Mm.
exploiting your positions of trust to acquire information, that
Yeah.
this basically deceptive position that you are in, well, it violates nobody likes a spy. These are not glamorous movie spies
Yes.
in
Yeah.
Spiona. Nobody likes a real spy. So so therefore the tensions of the possible humanity of the spies, the definite humanity of everybody else, and the ultimately not very moral and not very ideological nature of the institutions that they are spying for. All of those things come together. And it's
Mm.
disturbing to the people. The
Yeah.
way you set up the situation in Spiona is disturbing. And so the people are saying, wow, something could really happen here. You know, whatever's going to
Yeah.
happen here, something's going to happen. And that's the same thing with all these other things we are talking about.
Mm.
So that's, I think, where you might want to think about what you do at the table, because I bet something like this happens when you begin to play.
Mm. That's right. Yeah, you have to come up with something. Otherwise, if everybody's happy, it's just okay. Well,
Yeah,
we have dinner now. Okay, we
right.
have
Yeah,
dinner, and
exactly.
it's
Nope.
happy.
Right. And not only
Then we.
that, but also it is even if you have everybody hating each other, okay, this person hates that person, this person's cheating on that other person, this person is really this person's, you know, uh, I don't know, this person is their possessed by their dead grandmother or whatever. All that is
Mm.
boring. It's just adding shit in there because we're not hearing anything that is genuinely interesting to us.
Yeah.
And so that, I think, is one of the best parts of this whole process, is saying, what about it suddenly makes us interested? Science fiction has the advantage over everything else because that's what it does almost by definition.
Yes, yeah.
Everybody else has to struggle a little bit, otherwise they will just become. Well, everybody was so excited after the first 2 episodes of Game of Thrones, but after the end of the second season, everybody is bored as shit. They just don't want to admit it.
Okay.
Because ultimately, nothing interesting is happening there. Everybody's just running around being assholes. So there's no reason at some basic human level to be interested in what is going on. Nothing about the situation is very interesting. You can say winter is coming 500 times and it still won't be interesting. So what?
Okay.
The zombies are coming. So what? So fucking what?
But I see a risk with this. If you have just like one shock, like that's tilting the balance, and then once this is like somehow resolved to some result, then basically the game is over. And the way I like to play is
I don't think that you can resolve the shock. It changes everything. What you now have are conflicts inside it. So now in that context is how you have situations, you have mysteries and questions and goals.
So it's kickstarting everything. Basically.
Right. It is inspiring the production of mysteries, questions, and goals that are fun.
Okay.
That commands the attention.
Mm-hmm.
And those are what get resolved or turn into more complicated versions of themselves or evolve into a larger issue or anything like that.
Yes.
So I think that's all I have time for. Is that okay?
Great. Yes, perfect. Yeah, it's a very interesting thought. I'll on that.
Yeah, excellent. We'll play some more when we get the chance, okay?
Okay, yeah, thanks very much. It was very inspiring.
All right, great. Take care. See you later.